America is hosting the World Cup, and the real game is happening off the field. There's a moment about 18 months before any World Cup begins, when the real construction starts. Not the stadiums. Not yet. It's the spreadsheets. Somewhere inside a municipal government office in Dallas, in Los Angeles, in New York, a team of economists, urban planners, and contract lawyers begins calculating a number so large it requires a new vocabulary. Not millions. Not even billions in the familiar sense. We're talking about a figure that touches airports, sewage systems, broadband infrastructure, hotel zoning laws, and temporary labor markets all at once. The 2026 FIFA World Cup will be hosted across 16 cities in 3 countries: the United States, Canada, and Mexico. 11 of those cities are American, and each one signed a host city agreement that most of their residents have never read. That document is worth reading. It outlines, in careful legal language, exactly what a city must provide: transportation guarantees, stadium upgrade minimums, security perimeters, media infrastructure, and something called a clean city policy, which restricts what businesses can advertise within a defined radius of every venue. Local companies, in some cases, are temporarily invisible inside their own neighborhoods. That's not a complaint. That's just how the contract works. Here's the first thing to understand about mega events. FIFA doesn't build anything. FIFA arrives. The host absorbs the construction cost, the operational cost, and the risk. FIFA collects the broadcasting rights, the sponsorship revenue, and the licensing fees. Then FIFA leaves. This isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system, and it has been since 1974, when FIFA reorganized itself into a structure that functions less like a sports federation and more like a global franchise operation. You don't buy a team. You buy the right to host the product. And the product, for 4 weeks, becomes the most watched live event on the planet. Approximately 5 billion people watched the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. 5 billion. That's a number larger than the entire global population when the tournament was first held in 1930. What does it mean to host something that 5 billion people are watching? It means you are not just running a soccer tournament. You are running a global broadcast event with stadiums attached. The game on the field is content. Everything surrounding it, the airports, the hotels, the transit corridors, the security apparatus, that's the delivery mechanism. And delivery mechanisms are expensive. The United States has hosted major international events before. The 1994 World Cup, the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, the 2002 Salt Lake Winter Games. Each time, the economic conversation follows a familiar arc: projections of tourism revenue, promises of infrastructure legacy, debates about public versus private funding. Each time, the actual numbers arrive years later, quieter, less discussed, harder to find in a headline. We'll get to those numbers. But first, there's something worth sitting with. The cities hosting the 2026 World Cup were not chosen randomly. They were chosen through a formal bid process in which each city demonstrated financial capacity, infrastructure readiness, and market size. In other words, the cities that could already afford it were selected to spend more. That's not irony. That's selection logic. And it raises a question that Block 02 will begin to answer, not about whether the World Cup is worth hosting, but about who precisely is doing the hosting. Because the name on the bid and the name on the invoice are not always the same. In the summer of 2018, a report landed on the desk of the Los Angeles City Controller that almost nobody outside municipal government noticed. It was a risk assessment, not of crime, not of traffic, of contractual exposure, the legal and financial obligations the city had quietly absorbed by agreeing to host FIFA matches 8 years in the future. The document ran to dozens of pages. The press coverage ran to almost none. This is where the economics of mega events get genuinely interesting. When a city signs a host city agreement with FIFA, it enters a relationship with a precise and asymmetric structure. FIFA's revenue is protected by contract. The city's costs are protected by optimism. Let's look at the actual architecture. FIFA's income from the 2026 World Cup is projected to exceed $11 billion. That figure comes primarily from 3 sources: global broadcasting rights, Tier 1 corporate sponsorships, think Adidas, Coca-Cola, Qatar Airways, and licensing fees on every piece of official merchandise sold anywhere on the planet. None of that revenue is shared with host cities. The cities receive something else instead. They receive the event itself, the foot traffic, the hotel bookings, the restaurant receipts, the tax base temporarily inflated by 4 weeks of international visitors. In economic terms, this is called an indirect return. You spend directly, you earn indirectly. The gap between those two things is where most of the debate lives. Here's a domestic analogy that might help. Imagine you agree to host a dinner party for 200 people. A catering company provides the food and charges every guest an entry fee. You provide the house, the parking, the furniture, the cleanup crew, and the security. At the end of the night, the catering company takes the entry fees home. You keep the leftover goodwill and the utility bill. That's not a scandal. That's a business model. The question is whether the goodwill is worth the bill. For the 2026 edition, the NFL stadiums being used, SoFi in Los Angeles, AT&T in Dallas, MetLife in New York, required significant FIFA standard upgrades. Temporary seating configurations, broadcast infrastructure, pitch installations over artificial turf surfaces. Some of those costs were absorbed by the stadium owners. Others were negotiated into city agreements. The line between private and public expenditure, in several cases, is genuinely difficult to locate. Then there's the clean city policy. Within a defined exclusion zone around each venue, typically several city blocks in radius, only official FIFA sponsors may advertise during tournament period. A local restaurant that has operated on that corner for 20 years cannot place a banner in its own window if the banner conflicts with sponsor visibility guidelines. The business doesn't close. It just becomes temporarily a background element in someone else's content. Small detail, real effect, and then there is the category that never makes the projections: security. The 2026 World Cup security operation involves coordination between federal agencies, state police, municipal forces, and private contractors across 11 American cities simultaneously. The federal government absorbs a portion of those costs. Cities absorb the rest. Estimates vary. Official figures are difficult to obtain, but historical comparisons with the 2014 Brazil World Cup and the 2016 Rio Olympics suggest security expenditure routinely exceeds initial projections by 30 to 60%. Not because anyone planned poorly, because securing a global event of this scale, in an era of elevated threat assessment, is genuinely more expensive than the models predict. None of this means the World Cup is a bad investment for American cities. The evidence on that question is more complicated than either the boosters or the skeptics tend to admit. But it does mean the investment is being made, quietly, across 11 cities, in ways that will shape municipal budgets, real estate values, and infrastructure priorities for the next decade regardless of what happens on the field. And here is the detail that Block 03 will examine more closely. The companies watching all of this most carefully are not the ones with their logos on the jerseys. They're the ones with their models on the neighborhoods. In 1992, Barcelona hosted the Summer Olympics. The games lasted 16 days. The infrastructure they justified lasted decades. The city used the event as architectural permission to redesign its waterfront, extend its metro system, and reposition itself on the global map as something more than a regional capital. Today, economists still debate how much of Barcelona's modern tourism economy traces directly back to that 16-day window. The games ended. The signal didn't. This is the mechanism that rarely appears in sports coverage, because it has nothing to do with sports. It has to do with how large-scale events function as communication, not to fans, but to capital. When the United States was awarded the 2026 World Cup, the announcement was received in two very different rooms simultaneously. In one room, soccer fans, city officials, sponsors, broadcasters. In the other room, real estate investment trusts, sovereign wealth funds, hotel development groups, and the analysts who advise them. The second room was quieter and considerably more attentive. Here's what they were reading. A World Cup host announcement is, in financial terms, a forward commitment. It tells the market that a specific set of cities will receive guaranteed international foot traffic, guaranteed global broadcast exposure, and guaranteed infrastructure investment, all within a defined future window. For a real estate developer evaluating a hotel project near MetLife Stadium, or a retail group considering a flagship location in downtown Miami, that commitment functions like a data point, a durable one. Property values in host-adjacent corridors don't always spike immediately. Sometimes they move slowly, steadily, over the years preceding the tournament. Sometimes the movement is subtle enough that only the models catch it. But the pattern, across multiple host nations, multiple decades, is consistent enough that it has its own name in urban economics literature. It's called the announcement effect, and it begins the day the bid is won, not the day the first match is played. Beyond real estate, there is the machinery of broadcasting rights, and this is where the numbers become genuinely architectural. FIFA sold the 2026 World Cup broadcasting rights in packages distributed across more than 200 territories. In the United States alone, the rights were split between Fox Sports and Telemundo, a deliberate bifurcation that targets two distinct demographic audiences with two distinct advertising ecosystems. The Spanish-language rights, in particular, reflect something the data has been saying for years. The fastest-growing soccer audience in the United States is also the fastest-growing consumer demographic in the United States. That's not a coincidence. That's a market thesis. Brands that sponsor the World Cup are not paying for logo placement. They are paying for association, the right to exist inside a 4-week period when collective attention is, briefly, unified. In a media landscape defined by fragmentation, that kind of synchronized attention is the scarcest commodity available. More scarce, in some ways, than the stadium seats themselves. And then there is soft power. This is the category that economists acknowledge but struggle to quantify. When the United States hosts the World Cup jointly with Canada and Mexico, 3 nations sharing a continent, a trade agreement, and a complicated recent history, the event becomes something larger than a tournament. It becomes a visual argument. For 40 days, the world watches these 3 countries cooperate, coordinate, and present themselves as a unified host to 5 billion viewers. The timing is not incidental. The USMCA trade relationship between the 3 nations is still relatively young. Cross-border infrastructure investment is ongoing. The diplomatic register of the joint hosting bid, submitted and approved years before the tournament arrives, carries a subtext that trade negotiators understand immediately. Sport as geopolitical grammar. It has always functioned this way. The World Cup simply does it at a scale few other events can match. But here is the tension that all of this sets up. The announcement effect, the broadcasting architecture, the soft power signal, the real estate models. These are the mechanisms that generate value from a World Cup. And almost none of that value flows back to the municipal governments that absorbed the construction costs, the security expenditure, and the contractual exposure. It flows to the funds, to the networks, to the brands, to the sovereign portfolios that moved quietly, early, and without press releases. Which leaves one final question, the one that Block 04 will sit with honestly. After the final whistle blows, after the stadiums go quiet, after the broadcast trucks drive away, what actually remains? And for whom? There is a stadium in Cape Town that seats 64,000 people that IT was built for the 2010 World Cup. It cost the South African government approximately $600 million. Today, it hosts roughly 8 major events per year. The math on that, the cost per event, the maintenance expenditure, the opportunity cost of the land, is not comfortable reading. The locals call it the mothership. They say it with a mixture of pride and resignation that is difficult to translate but immediately recognizable. This is the part of the conversation that the pre-tournament projections rarely survive contact with. The economic literature on mega-events has been accumulating quietly for 3 decades now, and its findings are, by the standards of academic consensus, unusually consistent. Andrew Zimbalist, economist at Smith College, spent years cataloging the gap between projected and actual returns for Olympic and World Cup host nations. His conclusion, stated plainly, the financial benefits are almost always overstated before the event and difficult to isolate after it. That's not ideology. That's methodology. The problem is a technical one called counterfactual displacement. When a city fills its hotels during the World Cup, the natural assumption is that those rooms represent new economic activity. But some portion of regular tourism is displaced by the event: business travelers who avoid the city during tournament weeks, conventions that relocate, residents who leave. The net gain is smaller than the gross number suggests, sometimes considerably smaller. There is also the infrastructure question. Not all infrastructure is equal. A renovated airport terminal serves a city for decades. A stadium built to FIFA's minimum capacity requirements, 70,000 seats, in some cases, serves a city for exactly as long as the city can fill it. American football stadiums converted for World Cup use returned to their primary function after the tournament. Purpose-built soccer stadiums in smaller markets face a longer question. And yet, the story is not uniformly cautionary, because the counterfactual displacement problem cuts both ways. The 1994 World Cup, also hosted by the United States, is widely credited with catalyzing the founding of Major League Soccer. The tournament demonstrated, empirically, that Americans would attend soccer matches in large numbers, a data point the market had not previously confirmed. That single observation reshaped the commercial architecture of American soccer for the next 30 years. The downstream value of that shift in franchise valuations, broadcasting contracts, youth participation rates, and merchandise revenue runs into the tens of billions of dollars. None of that appeared in the 1994 post-event economic report. Couldn't. It hadn't happened yet. This is the honest complexity at the center of the mega-event debate. The returns that are easiest to measure are often the smallest ones. The returns that are hardest to measure, the signal effects, the market repositioning, the cultural permission structures that unlock future investment, those take years, sometimes decades, to become legible. Barcelona understood this. Los Angeles, which hosted the 1984 Olympics at a rare profit, understood this. The cities that struggle are typically the ones that built for the event rather than through it. The 2026 World Cup arrives in a United States that is, by most metrics, already the world's largest sports entertainment market. The infrastructure exists. The broadcast ecosystem exists. The consumer appetite exists. The risk profile here is structurally different from Qatar, from Brazil, from South Africa, nations that built from a lower base and absorbed proportionally larger costs. Which means the question for American host cities is not survival. It's sequencing. What gets built now under the justification of the tournament that would have taken another decade to approve without it? Which transit corridors, which stadium districts, which neighborhood rezoning? Decisions move forward in 2024 and 2025 because a deadline exists, and because a deadline in municipal politics is the rarest and most powerful thing. That is the real game. Not the one with the scoreboard. The one with the zoning map. 0.5 billion people will watch the matches. They will see the goals, the upsets, the celebrations. They will see the flag and the anthem and the confetti. What they won't see, what almost nobody sees in real time, is the quieter competition running parallel to all of it. The competition for what stays. For which city used the tournament as a lever and which one used it as a backdrop. For which investments compound over the next 20 years, and which ones sit empty on a Thursday afternoon in February, 64,000 seats and no one coming. The final whistle is just a signal. The question is who was already listening before it blew.